All right, folks, we're going to get started. Welcome, first of all, everyone to the Board Leadership Alberta Lunch and Learns online learning sessions today. We have over 300 people registered for this session. Wow. So good to have so many of you share your lunch hour with us today. My name is Scott Vaughn. I am the host for today's Lunch and Learn session on behalf of Board Leadership Alberta. Working behind the scenes with me doing tech support is Shannon Shawtuzzi, and she is also with Board Leadership Alberta. Who is Board Leadership Alberta? Well, Board Leadership Alberta is a collaboration of representatives of Board Leadership Lethbridge, Board Leadership Southeast Alberta, and Board Leadership Edmonton. Many have attended a board leadership training event in Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, and Edmonton in the past that was coordinated by one of these board leadership committees. They have proven to be very popular and well attended over the past number of years by many not-for-profit board members and staff in Alberta. Board Leadership Alberta consists of representatives from each of these committees with a shared purpose to provide relevant and accessible training to representatives of not-for-profit volunteer sector organizations across all of Alberta. This Board Leadership Alberta initiative is an extension of that training, of each of these committees working together collaboratively on this specific project, this set of 3 lunch and learn sessions. On this slide is the listing of all the organizations that have representatives on each of the board leaderships that I identified before. As well, they support this board leadership initiative, these lunch and learn sessions. We thank each of these organizations for your support of Board Leadership Alberta, the individual board leadership training events in Edmonton, Medicine Hat, and Lethbridge, as well as your support for not-for-profit organizations in your community. Right now, we'd like to take a moment to recognize that we are on the traditional ancestral homeland of many diverse people of Alberta. The First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose ancestors have walked and stewarded this land since time immemorial. We recognize our role as settlers on this land, and we're grateful to work, live, and learn on this traditional territory. We are located all across Alberta and acknowledge the land of many peoples presently associated with Treaties 6, 7, and 8. This includes the Métis settlements and the 6 regions of the Métis Nation of Alberta. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude. I would also like now to note the chat box feature you have in Zoom. Make sure it is open. You may have to hover your mouse at the bottom of the screen for it to pop up. Feel free to put in your comments, observations, and questions throughout the session. We'll be placing a number of information links in the chat box as well. But one thing, please keep in mind that this is a public chat box intended for attaining your feedback on the topic areas or today, and for us to be able to present information, provide links to information, and share learnings related to the topic. So please provide any thoughts and comments with that consideration in the chat box. Thank you. I also wanted to mention that here, the whole set of 3, the 1-hour lunch and learn sessions that Board Leadership Alberta is proud to present this fall. As you can see here today, we're here for online meetings, successes and discoveries over the past year. The link to register for the other lunch and learns, you'll now see in the chat box. And keep in mind, registration is free of charge. We also want to note that all the lunch and learn sessions will be recorded and available on the Board Leadership Alberta YouTube channel. All registrants will receive a link to the video after the session when it's ready. So now, what we came for, I'm very excited on behalf of the Board Leadership Alberta Committee to introduce our first Lunch and Learn session. Online meetings, successes, and discoveries over the past year with the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues and their panel. The past year and a half have necessitated that many of our not-for-profit and community leagues meetings and community meetings for all of us are online. And likely many will be continuing that way in the months ahead. We thought this might be a good time to take stock of what we've learned and gain some insights that'll help all of us moving forward. To help us navigate the journey and share their experiences is a panel of representatives from the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues. Community leagues are well known in the neighborhoods of Edmonton. They've had to do much of their work online the past year, and we are fortunate to have them here with us today to share their successes and their discoveries. I'm now pleased to turn it over to Laura Cunningham-Shepley, the Executive Director of EFCL, Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues, who is going to introduce and moderate the panel of Community League representatives that will share their journey with us this lunch hour. So over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you everyone for taking your lunch hour to join us here today. We are very grateful to Board Leadership Alberta for providing us this opportunity to share our stories and experiences that Edmonton's community leagues have gone through over the last 18 months. Before we get started with our panel, I'd like to just take a couple minutes to set the context of the EFCL and community leagues in Edmonton to ensure that everyone across the province has a sense of, what these specific and unique nonprofit organizations are all about. The EFCL is an umbrella organization that supports 162 leagues across the city. We are celebrating our 100th year anniversary this year. And so we're a long-standing organization here in the city, and we are thrilled that continuing today, leagues are developing. In the past 3 years, we've had 5 new leagues join our system. And so we know that this is a system and an organization that Edmontonians feel very proud of and feel very connected with. At any one time across the city, we say there's over 1,500 volunteer league board members and thousands of people that just help with programming, events, and operations. And we'll see that again this weekend as leagues are hosting Community League Day events safely outdoors across the city. So far, we have over 60 that are continuing to make sure that this still can happen in a safe way, because we know that people need this opportunity to come together safely in community throughout the city. So community leagues are, volunteer, not-for-profit organizations, and they're formed to meet the unique needs and interests of people within a geographic boundary, within a neighborhood. And again, that's what's so unique about community leagues, is you come to that board table. When you leave that board table, you don't get to go and hide out in a different corner of the city. You are going to bump into those people. You're going to see them on your walks. You're going to see them at the playground. You're going to see them at the rink. It's very much a community all the time. And I think our panelists will talk a little bit about the joys and challenges that entails. So what do community leagues look like in terms of the board? Very similar to many other nonprofits, but they do have some, uniqueness, right? I mean, leagues often are managing amenities such as community league halls, rinks. So there's often people that are responsible for that sort of facility infrastructure. There's events directors, hall directors, and of course, your treasurer, secretary, president, and vice president. And then lots of leagues have different directors they add on: sustainability directors, inclusion directors. It really is up to each league as to how they decide what are the needs of the demographics of their neighborhood and how do they need to respond to those. And so again, what do community leagues do? Well, number one is they bring neighbors together. Number two, they coordinate recreation and programming. They do events that bring local affordable opportunities to the neighborhood. Number three is they develop and maintain those amenities. So from halls to skating rinks to playgrounds, leagues have raised over $500 million to build these projects across the city. And most of that leagues continue to manage and maintain. And fourthly, they represent community interests. So each league is super unique, just depending on the demographics of the neighborhood, their location in the city. And so again, we see those different interests across the league system. So presenting our panel today, I should say, and representing our league system are 3 people that I am just so honored have agreed to share their stories and experiences with you today. We have Ryan Barber, who's the president of the EFCL, Anita London, who's the president of Avonmore Community League, and Marissa McIsaac, who works with the EFCL as a community activator. I'm going to turn it over to each of them to say a few words and introduce themselves a little bit more thoroughly, so you have a bit of context about the work that they each do. Just before we start with that, As Scott had mentioned, in the panel today, we have some specific questions we're going to work through. But if you have questions that come up along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will try to address them in our questions along the way. We will hold a specific amount of time at the end, the last 15-20 minutes, where we will specifically respond to your questions. So please, if you can hold on to that point, that's great. And if something spurs your interest, feel free to pop it in the chat. So I will turn it over now to Ryan to introduce himself and just tell a little bit about the role that he plays in the organization. Ryan?
Thanks, Laura, and thank you as well, Scott, and everybody in attendance. It's really an honor to be here today and share our experiences over the last year. It's been quite the year, so I'm very happy to have other panelists with us today that I think I'm very hopeful that you'll be able to gain some insights and some knowledge into how we've done things over the last year. So as Laura had mentioned, I'm the president of the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues. I've been president of the AFCL for a few years now, so I have the privilege of seeing sort of how we operated, or how we operated before COVID-19 and how we're operating now and continue to operate through this pandemic. So in my day life, I'm a policy advisor with the government of Alberta. I work in various areas, including disaster recovery, and provide policy analysis, and worked on the Premier's Fort McMurray Wildfire Recovery Task Force. So I have some experience in dealing with trying times, I guess you could say. I've also volunteered my time on the government's organizing committee for the United Way, and our committee with me as chair was honored by the United Way of the Capital Region and Premier Notley as the United Way Campaign Committee of the Year. So not quite board work, but additional committee work that requires bringing people together and moving forward with some critical decisions. So again, thanks very much for everybody being here today, and I'll pass it back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for that. Anita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Anita London, president of Avonmore Community League. How many years have I been involved with board governance? It feels like forever, about 40, I think, sometimes more intensely than others. But it's a continuous learning experience, and this year has been yet more learning. So great to see how many people have joined, and I actually see a few familiar names from on this long list across the province. So welcome, and hello to those of you who we've met in person at some time.
Great, thank you, Anita. Marissa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks everyone for coming out. My name is Marissa McIsaac. As Laura mentioned, I'm a community activator employed by the EFCL. But I was also the vice president and the secretary of my own community league. So I kind of wear that hat as well. So I was on my board for 2 years in the pandemic. The first experience I had as a board member officially was the opening of the pandemic. So my very first job was to write a challenging newsletter about all the changes that were coming down the pike at my community league. And so, yes, I was on the board for 2 years. I'm no longer on that board. But in my professional capacity, I'm a registered social worker. So thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you, Marissa. So now we'll turn it back to our panelists for them to each say a few words about their general experience with online meetings over the last 18 years, just to give you a little bit of a flavor about where things have been for them. I think, Ryan, I'm gonna start with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Laura, I was just reading a question in the chat actually that was coming through. Could you just repeat that for me, please?
No, it's just an opportunity for you now to say a few words more generally about the experience over the last year, 18 months.
Yeah, so the experience has been interesting. It's required a large transition from where we were previously. Being face-to-face, I mean, when you consider some of the things that Laura had shared in her presentation, we're a very community-based organization. That really entails seeing people face-to-face, being with people face-to-face, putting on events for our communities, and having sort of critical conversations with other members of our community in a board setting face-to-face. And so over the last year, this has had to shift quite a bit for us, as you can imagine, being that sort of hands-on, sort of activity-based organization that we are. And so, that has brought a lot of challenges, but of course, as most of you have probably recognized, there's a lot of opportunities too. And we'll talk about a little bit about that today, about what are some of those opportunities, such as reaching new folks that we might not have been able to before, and some of the other challenges, such as what does this mean for sort of building those relationships within community and continuing those. So yeah, very pleased to talk about some of these things today with you.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Anita?
I think overall it's been I can say a positive experience. I think it showed us that we can respond quickly. We can do things differently, to the point that I think we will keep on meeting online, because we found it just worked better. In our case, it was actually more inclusive, because physically meeting meant people with small children, people with other kinds of jobs who travel a lot couldn't be on the board. And now we've overcome that barrier. So, we would rather have learned it without COVID being the motivating factor. I think it was a good learning experience, that aspect.
Yeah, excellent point, Anita. Yeah, thank you for that. Marissa?
Sure. It's been interesting. I first started at the EFCL in March of last year. So my experience working with community leagues has only been within the context of COVID. So as a community activator, part of my role is to go out to as many board meetings as I possibly can, to give a short presentation on how the EFCL can support different community leagues. So that's been quite the experience, kind of navigating that and going to a ton of different things. So I have a lot of perspectives. I've seen a lot of different meeting platforms, as well as a lot of different chairing styles within the virtual setting. And then in addition, I've been supporting community leagues, particularly for their AGMs, because they don't always have the capacity within their platforms to host the number of people that they need to have for their AGMs. So the EFCL actually offers them our platform. So I work with them to set up their meeting, their AGM meeting link and everything, and then get them set up so I can transfer over the hosting duties to them. So that's been interesting as well. Yeah, I think that's pretty much my comment.
Yeah, thanks, Marissa. And absolutely, I mean, AGMs have been so critical for leagues. We've, hosted and helped, I think probably the majority of the 162 leagues with AGMs at some point in the last 18 months. And so, I think we're all learning. Everyone's moving along the spectrum, absolutely. But I think there are still some leagues that just, require a hand, and that's okay. That's, the beauty of why our organization is here, absolutely. So now we're going to move in, to a question around what has the biggest success been that you've seen with moving to online meetings. Now, Anita kind of referred to some of her successes, but Ryan, I'd like to start with you again. What has been the biggest success that you've seen with online meetings for the EFCL?
Well, I think maybe just to back it up a little bit, Laura, so one of the biggest successes that I saw was the actual transition to online meetings. So I think it's important, as the chair of our board and working with you, Laura, on a regular basis, is really what I've come to understand is that social and geopolitical events now have a profound effect on nonprofit and for-profit organizations, really any organizations. When you consider the Syrian refugee crisis, to COVID, to the Black Lives Matter movement, these events, these movements are really affecting local-based organizations in really profound ways. And these are large, really geopolitical sorts of issues. And so anticipating what might come down the line based on some of those geopolitical events or social events is really becoming a bigger part of boards and organizations. And so I can talk about a little bit about how we moved to online and how we got there successfully. And so keeping aware of sort of the news that was coming in October of 2019, November of 2019, it seemed to be that information was starting to come out in the news that there was something going on with a virus. And this sort of piqued my interest because I hadn't really seen information like this from credible sources really ever, even during SARS. And so Laura and I had a conversation about what that might mean. And there was a little bit of nervous laughter at that time, because you don't want to be perceived that you're an alarmist. And I don't think Laura did either at the time, speaking for her. But, you know, we had that conversation. I think this is serious. I think this is going to change how we do our work in a profound way. And we had that early conversation. And I'm very pleased to say that we were able to transition. We are in the midst of already looking at different ways for our board members to interface with the organization and with each other through the use of new software and new equipment. But I think that this accelerated those sorts of activities. And so when things got progressively worse, we were able to transition to basically this new technology. And really, I think one of the greatest successes is that our regular operations were not interrupted. I would say really very minimally. I mean, for folks having to transition to home, to work from home, for board members to continue having board meetings online. I mean, that is a big shift, but the technology was in place because we anticipated something that was happening on a geopolitical level would probably have an effect on our really locally based organization. So I think now we need to be thinking a little bit bigger than just what our local concerns are, what our local work is, and really understand how some of these larger events can impact us. So I would say one of the largest successes here, Laura, on the technology side, was our ability to anticipate what some of those changes might have been, so that we could continue our operations unabated, which we've had a significant initiatives that couldn't stop, that we needed to keep moving. So that's what I'm very proud of.
Great, thank you, Ryan. You said that very well, absolutely. Anita, how about you? What would you like to sort of highlight as some of the big successes that you've seen with the League over the last 18 months?
All right. Well, I think the board meetings, being able to use, we chose Zoom as a platform to use, and that worked well. So we could continue to meet, we could continue to deal with the challenges of COVID and make decisions, and that we could convey that using other means to the community, Facebook, Instagram, saying, hey, we're still here, folks, we're still looking after things. Then we instituted a process where people kind of watch your neighbor, and if someone's in difficulty, you know, can't partner up, let's all still look after each other, especially in the winter when we weren't seeing people as much. And so it wasn't just the board, it was then helping our community as a whole to adapt. And then we started running programs online where people could at least see each other online, know that other members of the community were there. And, you know, with a little bit of help, it's amazing how quickly most people adapted with the help of their families or whoever to do that. So I think it gave us all a sense of we're more than a hall, we're more than a hockey rink. You know, we are actually a connected community that can continue. And so when things did open up, we were not starting from scratch. We still had a community there. And now if things maybe are closing down again, like we have these other options, and we know that like as Ryan said, we know we can do this, and we just got to find a way to do it. So yeah, hopefully we don't get too many more of these challenges thrown at us, but no, I think it kind of increased our confidence in how we can work together as a community.
That's great, Anita, and I love how you as a community league have been able to really tie that neighborhood connection and looking after neighbors. I think that's been something that we've all appreciated through COVID, is that we've never appreciated more the people we have around us and next door, right? And so I think that's really well said. Marissa, what would you say would be some of the successes you've seen from the leagues that you've supported?
I think kind of going back to Ryan's point about the adaptability, I think it's been very impressive to see how leagues have transitioned online. And especially, you know, going to all of these different meetings and seeing how they all have adapted. You know, I think it's important to keep in mind that each league is its own unique not-for-profit organization. They don't all do things the same way, but they have all adapted and found platforms that work for them in whatever way, shape, or form that might look like. And they've been able, for the most part, to train everybody on their board to be able to use that platform to continue to get their business done. And so I think I would really like to applaud them on those efforts that they've made, because it's not easy. I am not a tech person. You know, there were bumps in the road for me to learn some of these platforms. I've seen a lot of them. I've presented on a lot of them. And, you know, me coming in there with not knowing about some of these different platforms, they were able to train me on how to present my information. So I think that was one of the biggest successes that I've seen for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all become a lot more aware and adept, and we're much more flexible than we used to be. I think some of us, right, just used to sort of things will go sideways. It's almost like we expect that now. We just know how to pivot quickly and laugh a little bit about it, not take ourselves quite so seriously. You know, and maybe I'll start with you, Marissa, just again, you know, building on that, you know, what would be some of the challenges that you've seen leagues really struggle with the online meetings? What have been some of those hiccups that I think, you know, that you've been able to identify?
Sure. I think some of the ones that I've seen, you know, are the typical, you know, oh, this person's audio is not working, or oh, you know, Bob's having trouble getting in, or you know, things like that. And it does stall the meetings. It can eat up some of the time that they have, which I respect is frustrating because they are volunteers. And so for them to spend any amount of time within the meetings on just the technicalities, I respect that that would be frustrating for them. So they've dealt with issues around that, but for the most part, what I've witnessed is that they are highly adaptable. So if somebody's struggling coming in, they have a phone alternative, or they have, you know, other ways to make sure that people can participate. So I think the key word really for what I've seen is adaptable.
Yeah, such a good point, Marissa. Such a good point. Anita, how about you? What would you say would be the biggest challenge that you've seen? You know, and especially with your long history with board meetings that have looked very different than these, what would you say has been the biggest challenge in this shift to online meetings for your league?
Well, one I think is doing staying engaged with everybody and trying to watch who's engaged and who isn't, because it's very easy. I mean, it was easy enough to, you know, to be on your cell phone under the table or whatever at a face-to-face meeting, but it was really easy to be multitasking, and also people are participating from home. So there's the distractions of putting the kids to bed or somebody's homework, and sort of respecting that people have a lot going on and they can't just close the door and ignore you know, their life and their home. So allowing people that leeway if they have to step away for a minute or whatever to do that. But the other thing is, like in a face-to-face meeting, I know sometimes people were, you know, your mind can still wander, you're physically there, but you're working, you know, a problem from work or something that's left over. So maybe it made me more aware of okay, who's here, fully here, and who's only sort of halfway here, and that kind of thing, and then trying to kind of bring people back, you know, together to so having to watch more carefully. And I really found helping watching the recordings of the meeting afterwards, because then I could look at people's faces and say, well, you know, so I don't think they spoke at all during the meeting, or man, they, you know, they seem to be in and out. So having that opportunity to go back over the full meeting and take a look at it, I think that really, especially in the beginning, it really, okay, you know, this is kind of what I need to do. And then later on, I think Zoom or online fatigue really set in. Like some people, it was their 4th Zoom meeting of the day, or, you know, they've been online all day, they've been in their basement office or wherever all day with, and, you know, that all they just wanted to see some real people. So having to figure out that maybe because we're in a neighborhood and nobody's more than 10 minutes from each other, to set up some sidewalk meetings or some, you know, just since somebody really needs to talk to somebody face to face, and recognizing we had to provide some alternatives for people and who was just kind of done with online for a while, and give them some other opportunities. So yeah, I think it really did hopefully has sharpened my skills, just a whole other set of things to watch for. And so yeah, it will continue to be a challenge.
That's so interesting, Anita. You know, it's a good point to bring up about reflecting on the meeting and going back and watching it, right? We don't get that opportunity when we meet in person, but, you know, to speak about how it can help your skill set, you know, we listen a little bit different to, why did I ask the question that way? Or, you know, how come, you know, Joe actually hasn't talked the entire meeting. Why didn't I, you know, say something to kind of try to pull him out? So, you know, really interesting to think about how that's a, you know, although a challenge is the fatigue of it, but there are some things that can come of it that we can really learn from. Ryan, how about you? With, you know, what would be some of the biggest challenge you would see with the online meeting format?
Some of Anita's sentiments, but for me in my position as the president, you know, people getting to know me is essential to getting things done. You know, whether that's on our own board or whether that's dealing with our membership, which includes 162 community leagues and probably thousands of volunteers across the city. And then we've got the city, who is also our partner, and numerous other partners as well. So, you know, people getting to know me is a really big part of the job. And can you really have that same sort of conversation by Zoom or any other technology and really build those relationships? You probably can to a certain degree, but it's very, very different than that traditional means of getting in front of somebody, having that conversation. And sometimes we get into a little bit of formality when we have these sorts of like Zoom meetings and that sort of thing. And you have technology issues. The conversation doesn't move the same. It doesn't flow the same. When I stop, it's like a walkie-talkie. Now Laura can talk, and then I can talk, and so it's not quite as natural in face-to-face. Also, you know, Laura, Anita had touched on this, you know, during the meetings. You know, when I'm running a board meeting, and I see a camera that might go off for a second, you have to ask from a governance perspective, what does that mean for quorum if it affects my quorum? You know, what does that mean for the decision making that we're making within that board itself? You know, like at the EFCL, we're a little bit different on the governance side. So we have spirited discussions, and we allow people to, you know, maybe put up their hand and get in on that conversation. And we find that works well for us. We have at our base level a genuine respect for each other on our board, but you know, those spirited discussions is how sometimes we got to those decisions. And again, when you have a break, you know, I made my proposal, or I had my discussion piece, the other person begins. It's not quite the same. So it's challenging to have conversations. It's challenging to get to know people, and which really helps drive our initiatives at the EFCL. So that's been a big challenge, and that we're still working with, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. No, that's right. It's just different than when you can sit around a table and have a cup of coffee together and just chat. And it is much more difficult to do that in the online meetings, for sure. So, you know, I guess, Anita, you kind of touched on this earlier, but I'm really curious about how the online meeting and this, you know, approach has affected your ability to chair a meeting, right? Like, how has it impacted how you lead the meeting, how you lead your organization, essentially?
Mhm. Well, again, I refer to the ability to watch the meeting afterwards. I recorded the first couple and I didn't watch them right away. And then I did, and I was quite shocked, actually. I talked way too much. I think I felt like compelled to fill up the dead air or something. And at least I hope I didn't always talk that much, but maybe I did. So then I started really to plan the meetings where it kind of forced other people to talk if they wanted to, like, so and leaving little cues for myself in terms of okay, you've talked this long now, and it may be how I was phrasing questions and who maybe was not participating. I think it became more evident to me, the people who were maybe thinking about but were not commenting. Maybe something else was going on in their life that day, and maybe following up with them afterwards. I think I did more preparation, just tightening up the agenda, trying not to make the meetings as long, because people recognizing again that some people had spent all day online. So and it works in our community to start meeting at 8 at night, because people do have young families, and that's just the time that, so we might be meeting till 10 or whatever, and trying to keep it down to the critical parts, but then recognizing that, hey, we can meet online anytime as a couple of people, 2 or 3, or I'll meet on the street. We don't have to cover everything tonight. Like, so what is most critical? Where do we need to vote on something and move something forward with that? So just that adaptation of things, and then once in a while trying to introduce a little bit fun into the meeting, to break the seriousness of the meeting, to let people's kids pop in once in a while, because we knew they were there. And so what is it, or their dogs, like dogs have become a big thing. We can hear them barking. So, well, let's take a look at that dog and that kind of thing, because it can get very boring and serious online. I think all the fun, all the little side conversations can't happen. So kind of have to do that. So I think that took a while to say, wow, this is pretty, we got to lighten this up. Plus there's a lot of serious stuff going on in people's lives. So like, let's just lighten this up a little bit. So those were some of the learnings.
Yeah, great point, Anita. And that was, addressed in some of the questions earlier, is how to make these meetings, have a bit more joy, right? It's easy to have a bit of joy when you can share a glass of wine at the end of the meeting, or there's something to eat together. Those are things that as humans we gravitate towards. So Marissa, I'm gonna call on you. What have you seen has been some ways that leagues have been able to bring a bit of joy and fun to the meetings, to lighten it up?
I think for sure, following up on what Anita said, like people saying, oh, here's my cat, look at my baby, doing those. I think it's actually a very unique opportunity that we have to showcase a little bit more about who we are through our surroundings. So you're right inside someone's home, you're looking at their kitchen or their, table, office area or what have you. And so you learn a little bit more about people through that experience, I think. But yeah, definitely having those breaks, or, some chairs will add in a lot of jokes, a lot of personal, warmth, I guess. I don't know what else to call it, a little bit more personable. It's an interesting experience going to so many different meetings, right? Because some people are very specific about following Robert's rules. And so their meetings are very efficient because they can just go through, and maybe that's the best for their board, because their focus is just getting people back to their, getting the business done so people can go back to their lives. And then others might take a bit more of that time to focus on building those more personable relationships with each other and those board members. So each to their own, I think.
So interesting, Marissa. Absolutely. And we've seen even some little games that people have played, right? So take me on a tour of your home, or, find some things in your home. There are some fun ways that you can mix it up. Ryan, I'm just curious, I'm going to go back to the same question I asked Anita, but how has online meetings affected your ability to chair the meeting? Like, how has it affected you as the leader of this organization to have to manage and move this organization through while all online, while just looking at little boxes of people?
Yeah, well, it's definitely been different, Laura. So I would say one of the bigger things is really fully realizing that position of being a host. And so, when you're online and you're conducting a general meeting online, it's been a lot different than it used to be. So when you consider things like radio, different types of media like radio, or even your nightly news. And think about that. There's no dead air, and they often talk about that. Silence is really not a great thing for those two mediums. And so I find myself, as probably everyone at some point in this meeting has experienced, you have a technical challenge. And so as that's starting to get worked out, like for example, at one of our general meetings when we first had it going, I think it went really well, all things considered. But there's folks trying to find the voting button. Well, where do I go to vote? And then you've got some concerns. Well, does everybody have the opportunity to vote? And so those things needed time to get worked out on the back end. And so I needed to fill sort of that sort of dead air space for a few minutes. So adding anecdotes, having, sharing updates about what was going on within our organization, or just thanking people for their patience and letting them know we'll get there. So, really having to fulfill that role as host when having a board meeting or in general meetings, especially, and really moving that conversation along so that there isn't that dead air. And because really what happens when there is that space where there is no talking, or there's a lengthy space, is that people start to grab this and whatever else they might have going on their screen. They might be watching the hockey game, they could be doing anything. And so you don't want to lose that attention. You really want to keep that attention throughout those board meetings, or that general meeting especially. So fulfilling that host role has been a bigger one. And that's not something that everyone is going to be comfortable with, I don't think. And so, my suggestion to that would be, have somebody who can fill that role, within your board or on that general meeting as host, just to keep the flow moving and the conversation moving, and keeping people's attention too.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. And I mean, our general meetings, just for folks with context here, have usually over 100 people. So similar to this kind of forum where you're trying to manage a large group of people and make decisions and vote, and see a few questions in the chat about decorum and how you manage those things. And just frankly, I mean, sometimes we've just had to use different platforms that allow for, rooms that people go in where they can only vote, because we can have public people and we can have members. And so, really understanding those different platforms has been so important for sure. So, I just want to go to a sort of a last question before we open it up to the questions in the chat specifically. And Anita, maybe I'll start with you, but what is the greatest lesson that you have learned through online meetings? Like, what are you walking away from? And I don't need to say walking away, but walking into maybe with the next few months. We had hoped that this panel would be at a time when we were this was behind us, but it's not behind us. So, what is that lesson that you're kind of carrying through into the fall here from online meetings?
Yeah, I think it's like the meetings itself, getting the business of the organization done. I think we're good with that. We can do that online, but I do need to keep paying attention to the personal relationships, interpersonal relationships that are harder to build online, and just having the meeting session isn't enough. So trying to work in, and again, it's the beauty of a community organization. We live close together, so just arranging to meet up with somebody. If they're taking their kids to the park, well, I'll just come over, we can have a chat, or sharing an interest in gardening, especially for some new members, because we had to have 4 new board members join that I don't know very, very well. The huge age difference. I mean, they're wonderful. I love to have them, but I just feel like I haven't had a chance to really get to know them. So having to continue to create those opportunities outdoors or whatever to build those relationships, which when things get tough, you really need to know people beyond being a face on a Zoom screen. And so I can't forget to do that. So that's what we have to keep working at. So yeah.
Excellent. Great point, Anita, for sure. How about you, Ryan?
Well, for me, Laura, I think it's the biggest lesson is be forgiving, and be understanding and have patience. Both as sort of the chair on meetings and that sort of thing, but also just from folks in general. We're all going through this new way of communicating, operating our boards, and moving our organizations forward. And those things are really important to really having it at your disposal and making sure that you have that sort of understanding that it's a difficult time for everybody. And so sometimes you'll even in general meetings and that sort of thing, you'll have difficult questions sometimes that aren't even questions. People are going through a very difficult time, and so having to understand that and how we can move forward. And that's just the biggest thing: the patience, forgiveness, and understanding as we all move through this all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How about you, Marissa? What was some of the big learnings that you've seen, the aha moments you've seen leagues have had over the last few months?
I think just the recognition of how extremely beneficial online meetings can be for their board members. So I've been to meetings, kind of touching on what Anita said, where people are making dinner, they're feeding their kids, they're in their car, they're in this backyard enjoying the sunshine. It allows people the flexibility to continue to participate, but still get things done that they need to in their lives. And I would have the concern that if people were placed in a choice where they had to do one or the other, they may just not show up to the board meeting. So it gives volunteers a lot more flexibility to still live their lives and get things done that they need to be doing, while also, having another foot in that door of still being able to participate and offer what they can to the league. And I also think about the improved accessibility for some groups of people. So single parents or parents of new babies, it gives them that flexibility to be there, even though they might still have their kids there with them. People with mobility challenges who might not be able to access some league buildings, and even people who are deaf or hard of hearing. There's, the potential to have captioning, maybe not always the best captioning, but some level of improved accessibility there as well. So I think that's been some learning.
Yeah, absolutely, Marissa. And I saw in the chat earlier, someone mentioned about, how weather can affect internet connection. And I would say weather can affect your ability to get to a meeting when you live in the country. And so, and anywhere in the city. So I think, I think we've really learned that, there are some benefits to this. It is hard. And I really thank the three of you for really identifying some of the ways that you can, build those connections, whether it be in person, whether you allow a bit of time outside the meeting for breaks or earlier on or otherwise. It's just so important to build in new ways to connect, for sure. So we've had some great questions that have come through the chat, and just recognizing we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. So one of them was around, how can online meetings and sort of what we've learned through COVID really help to resolve some of these hard social problems? And I think, Ryan, you spoke a little bit about this, and I think, you speak often about the abilities of leagues to sort of really sort of come forward during this time to help resolve some of the big questions, those big problems that we're facing in our society. And the question, I'm not sure if it's specific to online meetings, and I think if you can sort of reference that, but also reference, the role that leagues can play in, addressing some of these harder social problems that we've been seeing throughout the year.
Well, as Laura had shared earlier, we're celebrating our 100th anniversary, and one of the largest tenets of the EFCL since really the beginning is an inclusiveness statement. And and that's regardless of your gender, religious affiliation, or any identifiable trait. And so that's something that we're very proud of at the EFCL. And so we have meaningful discussions at our community league level. We do have discussions about what is happening, you know, in our society, and that's a defining sort of trait of the EFCL itself. And so having those conversations has always been really important to our community leagues, to our membership, and to our board when we have those conversations. And so we have strategic plans. Many of our boards also, our community league boards also have strategic plans, and they include, you know, how to bring new folks into our community league movement. And so I will say that operating online, you know, and I've seen some of the questions come in on the right here. They do, it's been great for a lot of folks, especially if you have, say, like younger kids that you know, or you're working shift work. It's a bit easier to come in on these meetings, you know, when we're doing this over the internet. And you know, so we're really, I guess, in a way, addressing some of the inclusiveness aspects of our movement, where we're looking to bring in people that traditionally haven't been or have barriers to joining community leagues and that sort of thing. So I think it's been positive and really in a good way. And so now it's going to be the conversation. Do we look at having hybrid meetings? What does that look like? So we have in-person meetings, and we have individuals who, you know, would be coming in on Zoom, for example. So what does that look like? And do you schedule a meeting for in-person and allow for the remote? And then, you know, I'm the only one who shows up in person. So then how do you sort of regulate that? Do you allow a certain portion to a certain amount of people to do, you know, the remote in, and then everyone else needs to sort of assemble in person as we move out of COVID and that sort of thing. So these are considerations we'll be discussing, but you know, it's really been positive in that, like I said, in a way that it brings in folks traditionally who've really had some barriers to being a part of.
Yeah. Absolutely, Ryan. No, that's a great point. We had another question, you know, and a few people have commented back and forth about the real challenge with developing and maintaining relationships online, you know, and especially if you have an AGM online, you have new board members, you know, how do you engage with them online? How do you build that relationship? So Nita, I'm going to pick on you for this one, because I know you've had a long history of working with boards. And so I think, you know, what can you think about on how to answer that question? How can you help to build those new relationships while maintaining safety, while maintaining that online approach?
Yeah, and like I said, if like with the community league, we're in close proximity, so it is possible to meet physically, although time constraints and so on. But in a wider community, I think you know, there is always the phone, you know, so having that one-to-one conversation with somebody, I think is a way getting to know them, where it isn't always just about the business of the community, but you know, where are they coming from? What are some of their issues, their interests? I know some this format, like a board Facebook page, which is a little bit of a lighter side. Like, here's what I did today. Here's, you know, here's what my backyard looks like. So it's whether you like Facebook or not, you can use Instagram, whatever, but it's a place where you can see the other side of people. Like, oh, this is, wow, they're a great bike enthusiasts. Like, so maybe we can have a contest about, you know, how many kilometers. So trying to come up with that social side where even if you meet, if it's a provincial group or an interprovincial group, where a couple of times a year you actually were able to get together for a couple of days and have some social events where you actually got to get to know them as people. So how can you kind of create that place to get to know people better, know what, you know, where they're coming from on certain issues. So I think, you know, using technology to the max, all the different venues, different platforms for sharing on the lighter side, and then continuing to work on the other side. I never have really liked talking on the phone, which is, I mean, I love to talk, but I don't know, something about long phone conversations have never work for me. So I'm always trying to find something like in writing or um, where I can see where people live and not more visual things for me. So I think you just have to. Technology has given us many gifts, and so try to explore what's out there that we could use.
Yeah, absolutely, Anita. I think those are great suggestions. And I think definitely the challenge with organizations that are spread out more broadly is real with online meetings. But I think we've seen in the chat too, folks have mentioned how great it is that they've been able to join meetings from across the country. And, you know, I would say it's so sad that you didn't get to go to Montreal for the meeting. But I mean, absolutely, that you were able to join and be part of those conversations and stay safe. And, you know, Anita, I know in some of our meetings and board meetings and general meetings, we try to have, you know, breakout rooms, or we try to, you know, have a social time before where you don't have an agenda, where people can, you know, kind of be a little bit more free or easy with how they talk with each other or chat. And I think sometimes those are important too, to build into your meeting that time, especially if you can't do it in person, right? Is how do you get to know each other as people? And I think, you know, that's what I'm hearing a lot of. And I think what people really value is we still want to have those relationships. That's why we join boards. That's why we join organizations. We feel passionate about change, and we want to meet other people who also feel that passion. So no, that's great. So thank you, folks. I think we're, you know, kind of coming to the end here. We're at 12:55. And so just want to say a huge thank you to our panelists, to Ryan, to Anita, to Marissa, you know, for taking the time to talk to us today about their experiences. I thank all of you on the chat and all of you that stayed with us. You know, it's been such a pleasure to have these conversations. You know, we're willing to stick around for a few minutes after 1 o'clock. If folks have some more questions that they'd like to ask or talk about, you know, we're happy to do that. And so again, if you're here in Edmonton, we encourage you to join your community league. There'll be community league events happening across the city this weekend, all safely outside, of course. And so if you go to efcl.org, that's our website, you can find information about how to contact your league, how to, you know, connect with the president, how to join one of those meetings, and also to see what support you can provide, what skills, assets that you bring to the table. Everyone's welcome. Absolutely. So thank you again. Scott, I think I'll turn it to you.
All right. Thank you, Laura. On behalf of Board Leadership Alberta and all the participants today, I would like to thank the panelists, Ryan, Anita, and Marissa. You know, special thank you for sharing your journey and learnings, leading virtual meetings, and taking the time to be with us today. And also thank you, Laura, for coordinating and moderating the panel of Community League reps. I think you gave us a lot of information that's going to be very valuable for all of us moving forward. The chat box has been lighting up with tips and thoughts and ideas that people are even sharing with each other. So I say thank you, participants, for doing that as well. I think it's been, I think we probably another hour or two we could have on this whole topic area. We had to, but unfortunately we do recognize that, you know, everybody does have other things they're doing today yet. And so we are going to close it off here. But once again, thank you so much for EFCL and the panelists for taking the time to be here. We could do a clap here. We would do it right now, but we'll do a virtual clap. The other thing I do want to mention before everybody goes is the evaluation form. There's a link in there you should see in the chat box anytime soon for you to provide your feedback on your experience with the Lunch and Learn session today. This information will be very, very helpful. You know, you heard about the initiative and the work together that the board leaderships have been doing together. So your feedback, or, you know, are we hitting the mark? Is this something that's helpful? And I think that's really important. And please click on the link now, though, to ensure you have the document up on your screen before we leave, because once we leave, you won't be able to access it anymore, but you can complete it throughout the day from that point on. So but make sure you click on it now so it pops up. And once, you know, so you complete it, once you complete it, there's a submit button at the bottom of the evaluation form, and we'll then obtain your thoughts as soon as you click on that final submit button. And I think, we have that evaluation form up there? Yeah, there it is. Thank you. We may have to put it up again too, because I see still lots of chat in that chat box, which is great. Want to mention, it doesn't end here today, folks. We have another Lunch and Learn next week at this time, and communicating virtually, laying the foundation of a successful brand. Same time, same place. Brian Siddle, Director of Community and Content at Strong Coffee Marketing, will be joining us on that day. So I hope that you'll be able to join us there. And then October 4th, Governing and Changing Times. Mike Grogan, the Executive Director of Integral Org, will be joining us. So we have some really more hot topics that are coming up that we sure want you to join us again over the next couple of weeks as well. And we also want to give a shout out to Board Leadership Calgary. They have an online learning sessions coming up in November. And last November, they initiated the online training of the board leadership concept that you're seeing today. And their sessions were well attended and received. So on the screen, you can see the dates for their upcoming sessions, their tentative topic areas, and also how to register when registration opens up in October. We also have a link for that as well in the chat box too. So the Board Leadership Calgary link is going to find its way in there for all of you that may want to sign up, and I hope you do, for the Board Leadership Calgary event coming up soon as well. And also I wanted to mention, if anybody's interested in obtaining the slide deck for today's session, you're also going to see the link under the resources. This slide deck is right there as well. You know, if you do wish to get a hold of that, that'll be available. And so on behalf of the Board Leadership Alberta Committee, thank you everyone for taking the time to be with us this lunch hour for the first Lunch and Learn session. So many of you came, thank you for doing that. Make sure to come back next week, this time for the Communicating Virtually, Laying the Foundation for a Successful Brand session. So take care, stay healthy, and have a great rest of your day and weeks.